Everyone, today's mini lesson is going to continue our conversation about how primary documents have influenced the democratic values which have impacted American history. Today we're going to focus on Abraham's famous speech, the Gettysburg Address. In a relatively short period of time, Lincoln was able to dedicate the battlefield to the fallen soldiers and discuss the efforts of the war. The learning target for this lesson is very similar to the learning targets that you've seen for the other lessons this unit. It states, I can identify core ideals of American society as reflected in the Gettysburg Address. Just to give you a little bit of recap, at this point we've looked at the Declaration of Independence, talked about how the Declaration of Independence outlined the concerns that the colonists had with how things were being run under Great Britain and expressed their desire to separate from Great Britain. In that, we talked about how it emphasizes equality and this concept that all men are created equal. We talked about liberty and how liberty is included in the inalienable rights and how that is often related to freedoms. And we talked about the pursuit of happiness also being connected to the natural rights or inalienable rights, where it is talking about a better personal fulfillment and achieving a better socioeconomic status. We also looked at the Constitution. We talked about how the Constitution was a modification from the first Constitution, which was called the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution created a system of limited government, which was made up of three branches, which have separate powers outlined in the Constitution and a system of checks and balances. We also talked about how the 14th Amendment to the Constitution expanded the right of equality to individuals regardless of race, gender, or background. We also talked about how the Constitution has changed in interpretation over time. In the last mini lesson, we looked at the Bill of Rights, which were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Within the Bill of Rights, we looked specifically at the liberties and how liberties are outlined in several of the amendments, including the First Amendment, which outlines the rights to things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. And we also looked at the Second Amendment, which extends the right to bear arms. We also talked about how the Bill of Rights is connected to this idea of justice and protecting the rights of the accused. Specifically, within the Fourth Amendment, this protects the rights to unreasonable search and seizure, and within the Eighth Amendment, it protects the rights versus cruel and unusual punishment. We also talked about how the Ninth and 10th Amendments work together in order to protect people and the state governments against the federal government becoming too powerful. In today's mini lesson, as we're looking at the Gettysburg Address, we are going to look at the values of liberty and equality, and we're specifically going to focus on how the Gettysburg Address kind of loops back and connects back to the Declaration of Independence. So, first of all, we're going to talk about liberty. Within liberty, this was a major concern for Lincoln. He emphasized the preservation of the Union to protect liberties. So, basically, what happened during the Civil War was as there increased tension between the northern states and the southern states, mainly based around slavery, the southern states actually seceded from the Union and created essentially their own country. So the Confederation was made up of the southern states. Each state basically did their own thing, but they worked together to fight the Union. So Lincoln's main goal at the beginning of the war was not necessarily even based around slavery, but it was based around making sure that the Union was rejoined. So his goal was to ensure that the southern states rejoined the rest of the country. However, at this point in the war, we start to see a change in kind of his momentum in terms of what he thought the war should be about. So here we start to see that he is talking about this idea of the preservation of liberty. In addition, the Civil War in general, the soldiers tried to bring freedom to the enslaved. So, a huge reason that a lot of the individuals in the North fought in the war was to end slavery, including at times even African Americans who were involved in the war effort. The other core ideal we're going to talk about is this concept of equality. So, at the beginning of the Gettysburg Address, he refers to 4 scores and 7 years ago. This is referencing the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Within the speech, he references the famous quote, "All men are created equal," and talks about how that isn't really a thing and how they need to be thoughtful and basically expand the rights of individuals. He talks about the disparities for slaves. So, this is one of the first times that we see Lincoln formally talking about how the war has shifted from just being about getting the states to rejoin the Union to focusing specifically about slavery. And so he is kind of changing the momentum of the war from just about unifying the country to being fought about inequality. However, even after the Gettysburg Address happens, the war still goes on for several years, and it took many years to address the racial inequalities. So this is really just the beginning of a larger conversation. The next mini lesson, we're going to look at the Reconstruction Amendments, which include the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. In those amendments, we'll talk about how the um, Constitution formally expands the rights of those who used to be enslaved. But at this point, Lincoln is just giving a speech. This is not a legal document. This is not a law or anything like that. He can't force anyone to follow it. He is just expressing his ideas and, in the process, dedicating the battlefield to those who lost their lives.